Shauna Wilson is president of Amazon Consulting, Inc., where she consults in performance management, audits to multiple quality standards, and provides online certification preparation training for the quality discipline. She's an IRCA-certified QMS auditor and a leading expert for the past decade for e-auditing and auditing global supply chains. She has a master's degree in performance management technologies. She's presented at ASQ international conferences since 2002, and her writings have been featured in Quality Progress, The Auditor Online, ASTD's InfoLine. Wilson is the Social Responsibility Chair at the Portland ASQ section and serves as the U.S. expert for PC Tag 302 ISO 19011 Auditing Management. Shauna, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Communication in virtual corporations. So part of the objectives that I want to cover initially include these four things. One is communication. What are we talking about? Two, how are we going to apply communication to the context of the organization, a new requirement from ISO 9001-2015. And how does e-auditing help to understand communication in the global supply chains and virtual corporations? And then we'll end with a review of e-auditing benefits. But I want to start out first with something that's been around for 20 years now, and that is the virtual organization or the global supply chains. Yes, they've been around since 1997. That was when the turn of, the corporations were then having remote workers and people working from home and also reaching out to other companies for core competencies. So they were, outsourcing at that point in time. That was the beginning of it. So we've had virtual organizations and global supply chains for 20 years now, and they've all had to learn how to communicate with one another virtually. One of the things that came out of that study and that research and experience of working virtually are these three things. The most important foundational components to help organizations be successful with their communication is cooperation with one another, having an infrastructure that will allow for the communication, as well as the technology. If we were to really put this in a real life situation where all of us on a daily basis, every time we step into our car and get out there on the road, we're all working in virtual teams. We all have a purpose, a direction in which we're going. We're using cooperation, hopefully, not road rage, to help one another move from one lane to another lane and to drive defensively. We have an infrastructure, the roads, the signs, the sequencing of the signals, all of this, and the technology. Now we're going to be the driverless cars. I have one of these that will warn me if I'm moving out of my lane. All working in coordination of each other to do a purpose, right? So we all are on virtual teams. And a lot of the argument with virtual teams in the past has been the trust building. How can I build trust if I don't see this person face to face? Well, my question is, how many times do you look over at that other driver? You're trusting that other driver is sober. You're trusting that other driver has had the training, and on as we go. So we all have experience in working in this way. One of the big issues with communication when we go in virtual is we leave this desk. And what this desk has had is a lot of subtle communication that we've just kind of taken for granted, right? So, and there's always somebody that's a lot more organized in the office than others. And they'll go to that person and they'll ask the information, right? They'll look at their contact list on their wall. Maybe they'll look at the posted meeting agendas that's been on the wall. They'll look at their notes, that type of thing. And so people have kind of relied on other people to get this information and this communication. And when they outsourced and they went out and people started working from home, a lot of this subtle communication that was really dependent on is lost. And so what took its place but email? And what we find, and even today, we still have a lot of this issue, and auditors, we should be checking and challenging this greatly, because how can people keep up with this email? for the communication. So there's thousands of emails. There's hundreds of email folders that contain even more thousands of emails. The linkage, and here's one of the bigger problems too, is that forward or reply to all, but then maybe somebody gets missed, and they're not added to it. So you don't have a good traceability as far as who understood an issue when they understood it, because, you know, how long did it take them to get through that email list? And did they just delete it because they didn't see it pertain to them also? So all of these kinds of things happen. Ideas for improved communication, of course, is that centralized location, those SharePoints that are, yes, they are difficult to work. Tracking databases are becoming more of the thing. And the push technology from those databases. So maybe you see one of those come into your email, you know it's important. So these are all different ways that the technology is taken over for communication. And these are all things that, as auditors, we need to really start looking at and studying and making decisions about. Now, the virtual teams, they say that the degree of collaboration that we should be at now, based on that 20-year period of experiencing working remotely, that the degree of collaboration they put it into two categories. One, a simple type of communication, and then a more complex communication. All right, so if we take a look at this matrix, the simple communication tools would be email and team bulletin boards, just giving you that information. A lot like that desk with the list on the wall, right? But then the high would be the instant messaging, so we're texting this stuff instantly to get somebody's attention for the escalation, or the teleconferencing. So this would be just getting everybody on a phone line and talking at this point. Real complex items would also then include the collaborative software and the video conferencing that are there. Now, if we apply this technology to tasks, what they're saying is that we should be able to, with the low level of technology, be able to share information, ideas, viewpoints, do brainstorming and planning, and recognizing, socializing with one another through the email and the team bulletin boards. It should be that simple, right? It should be that concise at this point with the technology. And then, of course, with the higher levels of complexity, we would then, the tasks would be around the building census, product development, solving problems, using cause and effect diagrams, affinity diagrams, flow charting. All these things can be done in these video conferencing and collaborative software programs. And I think they can be done better than face-to-face. So I think that many times we've crossed over that wall from it being better face-to-face than virtual, because virtual does present a lot of great solutions for interaction and problem solving. Okay, so what they're saying here also is leaving the conflicts. So if you've got an immediate conflict, pick up the phone and call them, or get on a plane and fly there, would be the reason that you would do that. You wouldn't do that to solve problems any longer. Okay, so when we have this kind of information given to us, and we've been an auditor that's flown the entire career from point A to point B, then you're going to be in an airport, and all of this has passed that auditor up, right? It's passed them by. And so this auditor isn't going to understand how to build trust remotely, because they're going to want to see that face-to-face and really be able to read the body language and that nonverbal communication. They're not going to be able to problem solve complex issues in these collaborative programs, because the technology abilities are low, because they're, the technology that they understand is email and writing a report in Word or in a database and the phone. It's none of this other real interactive piece that's part of problem solving in collaborative software. So this illustrates a lot of the auditors' inexperience to facilitate and to participate in a virtual meeting. So, sitting in the background listening to things does not count. I mean, being able to facilitate this is critical for auditors to be able to conduct e-audits and also audit these virtual corporations and these global supply chains, because you don't understand all of the dynamics around that. But there was a article that was published in the Auditor in 2016, setting the foundation for conducting audits. I recommend that you read that through the Auditor website. All right, so what we want to do now is we want to take it a step further, essentially, and let's apply context of the organization to communication. Okay, so how does the context of the organization lead us to communication? And this is the clause, ISO 9001-2015, clause 7.4. We want to answer that question. But, before I go into that, the best way I can describe that is with an example. I've got a fictitious example of a company. So let's say this battery company, now we all know batteries are a hot and heavy item in the world today because they keep blowing up, catching fire and that type of thing. So they're a real high risk product in the world today. And so this fictitious company, ABC Battery Design Company, and they've set up this global supply chain. Their scope of their certification is the design and prototype and the supply chain management for small and large format batteries. This is their organization, so they're pretty flat, and they just mostly have research and development teams. They have a procurement team that works with that supply chain and a quality management team that measures the quality review of that supply chain, and then supply chain management that's dealing with some of the suppliers. So their overall process flow in this is they design, they select strategic suppliers and contract manufacturers. Then they'll prototype with the contract manufacturer to release their product. They'll do a quality review at the end of that, and then they'll just continue on with supply chain management in their global supply chain. So this is the company. This is the context, or part of the context of that organization. If we take a look at the SWOT analysis, which is a tool that's often referred to as another means of understanding what the context of the organization is, their strengths, of course, is the research and development. Their weaknesses, of course, is the manufacturing component of making these batteries. Their threats are obvious with the safety and the hazards and explosions that can result with batteries. And then the opportunities that they have because of their flat system or their flat structure is they're able to gain new markets, and they're able to bring on new technologies, and really they can solve a lot of world problems with their batteries. So if we take a look at their internal parties, the management teams, the workforce, the procurement and design teams are critical to their strengths. And what's also critical to their strengths is being able to find customers, the battery OEM, strategic partners that do very good work there, and supplier distribution and the distribution centers, right? So they have that as a weakness because they don't know anything about that. So they're looking for these external parties to be a strength. Now, if we take a look at what we've just learned about the context of the organization, and now just put that into an interactive supply chain map, then this is what we need to understand as far as the risk-based thinking of this organization, correct? And this would be the audit trails, right? All right, so if we start out with this company here, and they've designed something, and now they're selecting these contract manufacturers or or suppliers. So here's a cell manufacturer, here's a board manufacturer, and the casing for the battery here. And then they've selected these contract manufacturers. Here's the small format, here's the large format contract manufacturer. And these suppliers will feed into these contract manufacturers, right? And then once the battery is made, then it goes into these wholesale distributors, which they will then sell to different retailers that go on to customers. And also these retailers go down this direction with the large format. So how is it that, what is the audit trail that the auditor would ask in a global supply chain? And what would be the communication methods that this company would have to do with all of these players that they have? Well, let's first look at the different kinds of tools that they could put in and the audit trails that they should have in this global supply chain, right? So FMEAs here, we can have SPC charting here with and test results, supplier reviews and e-audits this direction. We can have third-party testing here at the wholesaler to make sure that this is still working, have our internal audit with the company as well as e-audits in this direction. Mystery audits over here, interviewing the retailers to make sure that they're saying the right things about the product. And then we could have the customer feedback coming from the customer, and that would have to come in. So this is all the things that one would perhaps set up in a global supply chain. So this is the audit trail, and also this is the communication path as well. So I'm going to bring back an old clause from the old standard, ISO 9001-2008, clause 553, because this is really the communication that the standard writers were asking for, though they didn't clearly put that in that standard, and they wrote it another way in the existing standard. But if you get the handbook that the tag team puts out, they say in their notes and definitions that this is exactly what they're trying to communicate to everyone as far as communication in the organization. So what they were saying is, how is it that you transmit and receive information for quick response? How do you build trust? How do you transmit that importance? And then how do you identify continual improvements from that communication? So this would be an audit trail that an auditor should take based on that supply chain map, correct? So if in the old standard, they had it this direction, we could do the same thing with the current standard with the different sections. But 7.2, customer-facing communication, what would that be? Well, this would be all the different types of interaction that you could have with that customer. So it would be amendments to the orders. It could be contract handling or changes to the contracts or inquiries from a website or a phone. And then you would build trust with that customer by your customer service and giving them feedback and visiting the customer and that type of thing. So that would be methods for that. Meeting online with them now, right? Transmit importance. And so this would be how you would escalate their orders or their feedback if something was wrong, their complaints, or if there is an amendment to an issue or to an order. And then identify improvements from the customer surveys. So this is all communication paths and methods that an auditor should look for when looking at these global supply chains, because we just saw that this is not just in one place, but this is going to be working over a series of places, as well as the supplier management. So here we have the transmit of quick information that would be supplier selection, the approved suppliers, the purchase orders, and then the building the trust with them would be connecting with that supplier. You can do that with virtual rooms, that type of thing. And then the immediate feedback to them with scorecards or constructive feedback if there's issues. So these are it just goes on, and this is things that the audit trail should follow, as well as the communication. we have another another article that was published in the Auditor in 2013, Auditing Communication and Global Supply Chain, similar to this, that goes a lot more in depth as far as what this is talking about, and I encourage you to read that. Okay, so let's go on and let's talk more about how e-auditing can help to discover the communication issues. Let's first start out with a definition of what e-auditing is. If we compare it to the site audit definition, and this is a definition that came from J.P. Russell, and that definition is that an audit is a systematic and independent and documented process for obtaining sufficient audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent in which audit criteria are fulfilled. So it's being able to find the audit evidence and be able to make a judgment if that fulfills the requirements of a standard. And he says you have to have these kinds of processes in place for that. And so does the ISO 19011 standard requires this as well. You have to have an audit plan. You need to audit, interview with other people, observe what you see, verify any questions of the objective evidence, analyze that evidence, and then report those results. So like any kind of experiment or any kind of research, auditing has to follow the same kind of method and process so that you're able to gather clear and objective evidence. Now, an e-audit is the same. It's the very same. The only difference from an e-audit to a site audit is that you're using electronic means to remotely obtain that audit evidence to the extent to determine the conformity of the audit criteria. So it's the very same thing, except you're using electronic technology to discover the objective evidence. What an e-audit is that it's simultaneous. This is real time. An auditor interviews an auditee real time, just like face-to-face. That you use cameras, computers, computer collaboration, software, all these technologies today that's abundant. I mean, grandparents are doing this with their grandchildren all the time. All of this is at our on our cell phone in today's world. So it's all interactive, real time. All right. You have the systematic approach with record control, procedures, process review, and also the auditee who's being audited has full control of their computer throughout the whole audit. It's not like you're letting an unattended auditor review your company records and they can just openly go through all of those records. And also it's not a desk audit where you just send everything by email and the auditor reads it and then you correlate back and forth with email on questions. That is not what we're talking about either. So why does the audit method matter? Well, it matters for a lot of really good reasons. What I want to talk about here is the fact that you could go into an audit, go to the location, and you can have a room full of people there, and you can audit them. But most likely in these corporations or these global supply chain companies, these people are not the only people that should be in that room. There's a lot more people that are virtually working with this company that are not audited or even approached in this audit. And so what's behind this curtain here And I see it all the time when I'm working with different clients. The auditor comes in and they're clueless to the gravity of the remote locations that are here, that these people in the same room do not work together. They work with people in Europe, they work with people in India, they work with people in a different state nationally. They do not work with one another. They represent other functions, and they really don't have anything to do with one another most of the time. This is what I find. And so an auditor goes in, they're just kind of not seeing the whole picture here if they believe that they're going to be able to cover everything with a site audit. So that's why the audit method matters, because you're not seeing the whole picture. So there's a better way to find the audit evidence. You know, and obviously the virtual review of the records that are online and all that, but there's a lot more to that than just looking at records online with e-auditing. You can do e-auditing everywhere. So the other part of this is, will the audit method that's used sometimes prevent the audit from occurring? And that is yes. If you're not able to travel there due to weather, then that could be canceled, right? The audit could be canceled. Or if the budget doesn't have travel included in it, then that supplier audit's not going to happen either. So there's a lot more at play here with if that can work or not. So what I see and what I find most of the time is when the auditor's sitting there in this situation, they don't ask the questions about communication that they should ask. So, and the question here is, how would a co-located auditor, so somebody that's on site, know to ask these questions if they've not worked in these environments before, in these virtual environments before? And so I've just lined up a few questions that I would ask, because sometimes when the remote person goes into that new job remotely, they're kind of lost. They're kind of isolated. They can be isolated if the company does not have the infrastructure set up for communication for that remote employee, and they're only depending on email for them to gain their information. They can be lost out there for a long time. So one of the first questions, and the easier questions, is how does the remote person know who to contact in times of need, any time in need? And how does the remote person obtain critical information? Where do they get that information? And is it pushed to them? You know, that they would get an email saying that, yeah, this is now available, or do they need to pull it from something like a website or a SharePoint? Do they need to dig for it and find it? And do they know how to get it? The other part of this is, how timely is the email? You know, has it been forwarded to a number of people, and now it gets to you, or maybe it doesn't get to you? Maybe it's behind the other 50 emails that you just got that day and you haven't worked through it yet, and so you're deleting. Maybe it's highlighted as urgent and it'll go to the top of your list, but maybe it's not. And the other problem that we have here, the conflicting problem that we have with the technology here, is, does the emailing documents create issues with the centralized documents in the SharePoint? So maybe somebody updated a document, now emailed it, and so now the SharePoint document is obsolete. And maybe more people have updated that document in email, and it's going everywhere. So now you've got many different versions of that document, and what's in the SharePoint is not current. And it's tough to find where the current one is until you start collaborating and meeting and calling one another. Do you find this out? The other problem that happens with centralized locations, like moving to SharePoint, they're easy to just create. When people get good at building these things, I'm just going to create a new SharePoint, and I'm going to now use that one and not this other one. Now, there are SharePoints that will push the new links if they're updating the SharePoint, but if new SharePoints are built to take care of an issue and another one's left behind, then how is that new URL communicated to the user, to the multiple users? So all of this, these are all audit questions that need to be asked so as to improve the communication in the virtual corporation or the global supply chain. And these things are critical. Let's go back to this map and take a look at this. I'm just going to show this again as far as what this looked like, you know, as far as setting this up, the audit trail, and also the communication trail. So if we build in the communication infrastructure into this model, as well as the auditing structure for your e-audits to ensure all of this is occurring, let's take a look at what it could look like with the new standard. Now, what's different from the old standard, what I showed you in this one, is they have really broken up and focused on the internal versus the external interested parties. And so when we start building this, and this aligns with now the new requirements, the actual requirements of the standard. So they were more detailed than the last standard here, but when you read that handbook, it'll say at the end of the day, we want you to state what was in that original matrix. That's why I put it in this presentation, so that you would have that. So internal interested parties, internally, they would have to have these kinds of systems set up in order to maintain that global supply chain that we just reviewed. So what to communicate? So here are some of the easy ones: customer issues, supplier issues or supply issues, operations that are shut down, and what the team priorities are. Okay, so when would these be communicated? Well, real time when they happen, and let's say the team priorities are done weekly, then who's responsible for communicating these things, right? And with who are they supposed to communicate it to? And then how are they going to communicate it? And so this is built off of a structure that has a SharePoint or a centralized location or a database, because one of the things about the vision of the ISO 9001-2015 being the view of that, and the reasons why they adjusted the documented information the way that they did, is because this standard has to maintain for the next 10 years, let's say foreseeable next 10 years, and what will a company look like? But more technology, right? More technology for the communication. So they'll have more of these central databases and central locations for documents to store, and reduce that level of need for email, essentially, and that will just be used for notification of something changing at any of these locations. So with that in mind, if you're building a system up, then this is what that communication path would look like. If it's not like this, so this has an infrastructure, right? It's got the infrastructure where you've got the SharePoints, you have for customer issues, you've got the SharePoints for supplier issues, with pertinent people having access to these things, the supply chain issues list, and then a SharePoint for a homepage for just the management team to keep up with the local teams wherever they are located. So this would be a start, and this would be questions that an auditor should ask for in this clause if the context of their organization looks anything like this, even though you're just auditing here. A second one here is taking a look at the external interested parties. And so a lot of what we just saw on that map was the customer issues, the mystery audits, the supply issues, the SPC charting, yields, FMEAs, test results, the e-audit results, and the drawings that are set to any of these locations and changes to those, right? But here are all those inputs. When are they reviewed? They're reviewed real time. Who communicates? Well, these contractors, they communicate it, and they communicate it to these places or these people. And how do they do that? Well, they communicate to these people, and they put it on here, right? So you might have some email coming to these people or phone calls, but you would have this for the internal. But down here, we might have a shared Dropbox with those external parties because you're able to secure it. I think in the future, maybe the external parties will have access here. We'll be able to secure those areas as well. So here's another example of external interested parties and the communication and how it is associated with that based on that global supply chain. Now, if we go in and we think about auditing and supporting that communication, then the audit plan really needs to look very different than what we normally see with audit plans today. And reaching out for overall continual improvement too, an e-audit can take you much further than the face-to-face. In fact, you would just use that probably in an escalation where you need to fly there and have a face-to-face conversation with somebody. But otherwise, the different types of audits, conformance, performance, auditing for risks and opportunities, and supplier audits, those all can be done through an e-audit using checklists, looking at performance overall with the supply chain, see how lean it is, looking at auditing for lean concepts, contractual agreements with the risks and opportunities. You structure that into making sure the FMEAs are current and maybe regulatory testing is going on with those batteries. So these are all the different paths and all the different documents that can be collected within the e-audit that would support that communication method and be very helpful to the organization as well as people understanding their communication or being able to express their communication issues that they have in those remote companies. So auditors need to do this. Regardless if you're an on-site auditor, you need to understand these things. There's some other opportunities for benefits from e-auditing. Besides just e-auditing, is people are able to verify changes more quickly, where in the past maybe they weren't be able to because they would not be able to get to that location. You can talk more with your remote locations. I have people that I introduced e-auditing to a few years ago, and I audit them. I understand their whole system. They don't, because they're at their own location in their isolation. And now that they've gotten used to the e-auditing that I'm doing with them, they're learning to e-audit and work with one another. So now they're having meetings and they do their internal audits with one another. So if they're doing common processes, then they can really leverage from one another when they do it in this manner. And then, of course, the suppliers, where they counted on budget constraints and weather so that there wouldn't be a supplier audit, now they can have audits. You can audit those suppliers on a regular basis. And also you can contact them if there's an issue escalation more rapidly than getting on a plane, because it could disappear between the 24 hours that you're on a plane to that location and at that time where something's been discovered. So in closing, a summary message anyway of what we've just talked about is to consider the context of the organization and the risks and the interested parties. The internal audit process will need to have more tools and skills from the internal auditors to really audit that QMS correctly. And then the same would pass down to the registration auditors if they are not used in this environment. They will also need to learn these new auditing methods and come to understand the customer processes and how they conform to these requirements as well using these new methods. Some suggested training for auditors in getting started with this is one, learning how to communicate in the virtual teams. So understanding how to replace your nonverbal communication so that you're more comfortable with it, and how to validate communication issues without using that or relying on it as much. How to conduct those online meetings and meeting synchronously. So being comfortable with working technology as well as while you're facilitating a meeting. So it's like walking and chewing gum. Yes, it is. the other part of that is learning about people's learning styles. And, most people are visual learners. And when the telecommuting first came on, without visual, it's just telephone, it was a real challenge. And to most people, it is a challenge just to be in that audio environment. So learning how to counteract and when people are needing those kinds of different environments is critical understanding to communication for virtual teams. The technology is a given. Learning, getting comfortable with all of these electronic devices and being able to problem solve. I mean, I'm not going to kid you here. You're going to have to learn how to problem solve some technology and get it working for yourself to be able to be really good at this. Internal auditing, learning to facilitate an audit. So this would go back to learning how to facilitate a meeting virtually. That's the easy way to do that, is to just start meeting virtually with different people and trying out new methods for problem solving. And then once you get good at that and feeling better about that, then e-auditing will become your next step, and being able to do that and facilitate one of those. Let's see, just learning how to, use the standard process because you're remote. It's important to stand by that process for everybody involved to know what's going to happen, to be expected. So following the standard audit process for collecting data so that you can say that you used legitimate methods for collecting that data. That's very important for that. And the preparations for the internal and the external audits in giving the times and making sure that the time structures are relevant to the time zones that they're in you'll be auditing. Okay, and then of course the standards that you'll be using, making sure that they all apply to the context of the organization or the organization that you're auditing. Now, some of the benefits for companies that go this direction and focus on communication in their organization, they're going to better understand the issues of their quality system in the global supply chain and the communication issues that's there. You'll be able to resolve or help resolve those remote supply chain communication issues of not knowing something or communicating something wrong. You'll be able to make sure that all of those asynchronous locations like the SharePoints and websites are current, because a lot of times they're not current. And so an audit would help keep those current and bring the attention to everyone that these things need to be remain in control and that they represent the right information. Schedule record reviews with those online environments on an ongoing basis to make sure it doesn't get out of control over time, and then you can locate where the breakdown of communication is. And then the last thing here is that the remote auditing reduces costs. It's very efficient. Audits are very efficient. Remote auditing is so much more efficient than a face-to-face. You finish sooner. You collect a lot more information than you do in face-to-face. That's around that face-saving, chatting kind of thing. It just is so much reduced with the virtual, and you just get so much more done in the time frame that you have. And then the benefit here is it addresses the canceled audits, that you're less likely to cancel these audits, and that when you're having to look for risk-based items and supply chain performance, that this is really the way to do that, because this is the working environment in which those people work. Okay, so that concludes my presentation today, and I'll just leave you with getting the necessary training. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shauna. This ends today's presentation. Thanks for attending.